Welcome back to some more car thoughts. One of the things that if you hang around with me much, it's not long before I will quote some classical author from a Loeb classic, or bring something out, and people often wonder why it is that I seem a tad bit maybe overly eager about the classics, overly eager about classical education, and there's a couple of reasons. One, I've been involved in classical education for a long time, and I still talk to many of my students that I got to teach literature to on a regular basis. They call for advice or with questions. They let me know when they meet the girl that they're going to marry. They will we'll go out and grab coffee or sometimes beer with them now because they're old enough when they come into town, right? And I still have a great relationship with a number of my students, and I can see the way. And many of them were the students that in high school really struggled, right? Sometimes it was kind of moral failings, struggling, but more often than not, it was the students that were that struggled to wrestle through questions of who they are, questions of faith, who God is, what kind of world this is, and they. And I get them when they're 11th, 12th graders, and they are really struggling to make sense of the world because they're just old enough to realize how messed up this place is, but not quite old enough to have enough experience to maybe answer the questions. And what I have seen with the opportunity to study the classics, to study great literature, to enter into the great conversation that humanity has had through its literature from generation to generation, is that I've seen it really help students understand that they aren't alone. They aren't the first ones to see these issues, ask these questions, right? For example, to be able to be sure about whether or not they have true knowledge, right? Something like that. And they see that Plato and Aristotle wrestled with this. They see that the Romans wrestled with it. That then Augustine and Aquinas and different great theologians wrestled with the issue, right? That when they see that something is hard, or instead of saying, well, this is really hard, I must be the first one that's ever noticed it, and all of these people around me have no idea, they can say, oh no, this is actually a hard question, and you have to wrestle and to become wise enough to live with your eyes open, right? And that I think there's a lot of comfort actually in the wrestling with a question when you discover that it is a hard question to answer, that many people have been wrestling with it before you, and then coming to the realization that even the Christians that have gone before you have wrestled with these questions, and that you're actually a normal human wrestling with these questions, and then so that's one thing, is seeing the comfort that getting to be a part of the great conversation is for students as they enter into adulthood. So that's one reason. And then another one is just seeing how many of the people that really shifted and changed the world were people that understood where they were in the conversation, right? We use terms like they were a classicist, or they studied the classics, that sort of thing. And I think that isn't a helpful term. I mean, it's not a bad term, but it's not the most helpful way to put it, because studying the classics acts a little like somebody that studies butterflies by pinning them to a board, and then you can look at them, but they're dead, right? I think a better way to think about it is the people that really shifted and changed the world were the ones that understood where humanity was in the conversation. So they knew who had gone before. They understood who had said what, and because of that, they said, I get where we are in this conversation, so I know how to say the next thing that is appropriate for the conversation. And sometimes the bad guys did that. You got a guy like Nietzsche who shifted the entire Western civilization towards, and he wasn't the only one doing it, because in the Renaissance there were really two. There were sort of the Latinate and the Greek Renaissance movements, and then within Christian humanism there was the Latinate humanists and the Grecian humanists, the ones that wanted to say here's where the foundation begins. And then in the secular humanism, which is where Nietzsche lands, you had the Latinate and the Grecian humanists, and he was in the Greek camp, and the Latinate ones were more trying to hold on to the medieval, and the folks in the Greek camp were trying to overturn the medieval, sort of the medieval Latin scholarship. That's a way oversimplification, but I think it's helpful. I think it's real in the categories. So you've got a guy like Nietzsche who successfully overturns the conversation, or a guy like who else was really effective in overturning the conversation by study of the classics? Derrida, he would be another example. The German translator of Derrida, I can't think of his name. He studied the classics. He had done his doctoral work on Augustine, and it was able to kind of take the categories of Augustine and dethrone a Christian understanding of language, so you've got all of these guys that really study the classics, that use it for evil, and then you've got the really great founders of new institutions, ones that are rescuing and fighting for civilization, also did it by studying and understanding the classics and entering into that conversation. When you see it often enough, you realize that that this intergenerational corporate conversation of humanity is going on, and you have no access to the direction of your civilization without knowledge of your civilization's history, literary history, linguistic history. You don't have any access to the guidance of your civilization. Right? You can maybe burn it down, but even then, the guys that really burned it down were the ones that had access to it by means of the classics and an understanding of the classics. So that is the other reason that I'm really into classical learning, as it's sometimes called. So it is, I think, really important to know and understand where you are in the conversation of your civilization if you want to be a leader of any sort. So there you go. That's my quick defense of classics.